Hey, welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Chris Hernandez. And just for a quick recap of what we talked about last week on the podcast, we talked mainly about Salesforce editions for educational institutions as well as nonprofits or nonprofit arms to institutions. And I dove a little bit into talking about AI because AI is a huge buzzword now. It's been a huge buzzword and a huge buzz thing in all of media for the past year, 2 years. And so all companies, including Salesforce, are pushing these really big AI innovations. So before we push further, I talked about how most institutions, not even most, all institutions, because they're just getting set up with Salesforce, because Education Cloud is maybe like 4 or 5 years old. And in these past, I want to say around 5 years, there has been a lot of growth with the platforms. However, AI and how everyone's pushing AI is mainly for sales use cases. Most institutions don't actually need AI services right now because many of them are just getting set up on Salesforce because Salesforce is now slowly breaking its way into the educational sphere. And so a lot of people who are having Salesforce adopted into their institution and converting their other CRM platforms into Salesforce have these kind of broad ideas of how you can utilize AI within the platform, but don't necessarily really understand it or its actual potential use cases or the implications of using AI incorrectly. Now, what we're going to go over today is we're really actually going to talk about what Salesforce AI is, some use cases for educational institutions as well as their nonprofit arms, and then, of course, just some precautions in terms of using AI in Salesforce and maybe in the broader sense of outside Salesforce as well. So now, what is Salesforce AI? Now, Salesforce has really been pushing its AI like Einstein, because now Einstein is its internal AI. So it's Einstein GPT. They have Einstein bots. And when we talk about this, it's not Chat GPT or Mistral, Gemini, etc. I can go on naming them, DeepSeek. And it's not any of these generative AIs that are just slapped into Salesforce and helping you do things within the system, because the purpose of all of those AIs is that they're online learning models that are actually sending data back to a database in order to improve the next model of the AI. So now in an educational use case, this would be horrific because if you have something like ChatGPT hooked straight into a CRM, it would take all of that data that you're working with and it would put it back into its original servers so it can learn more about everything. But this is also against FERPA and in some cases HIPAA if you're keeping your student health information in there as well. So that's not what it is. So it's an internally built AI that keeps all your information within your own org and is completely trainable. Now, before I get further into this, Salesforce has really cornered the market in terms of, or has been the loudest in terms of integrating AI into their CRM system. But the main cornerstones of Salesforce's AI is A, the AI itself, and then B, the bots that exist, the AI bots that you can create in order to be customer facing or internal facing in order to help out with different functions. And all this is based on how you prompt, right? So it's much like, in a sense, ChatGPT or Mistral AI and all the other ones, in that your answers and your feedback from the system is only as good as your prompt. Now, with that being said, let's talk about use cases here. Okay, so their general use cases, because they push this basically towards enterprise businesses and not towards educational institutions, their enterprise and business use cases are sales AI, which is essentially for helping you draft things like emails, check-ins, reconnects, things like that to help the sales process move along faster. So you think that a salesperson is sitting at their desk and they have to draft all these emails, and sometimes they become templated and they become flavorless. So this really helps you with that. Then on top of that, you have their customer service AI, which helps with the smaller grade issues that are customer facing. So a case gets created, and if the case is very low on the totem pole, something like a reset password, the bot can help guide the customer through their password reset. Then there's their marketing AI that helps generate score numbers in terms of leads So how likely a lead is to buy something based off of previous data in the past. And now I'm saying all this and you're listening, and if you're an educator, you're like, well, Chris, what does all this mean? Because you're talking about businesses, you're not talking about education. So, and now if my admins, if there's any Salesforce admins out there that are listening to this podcast, you're going to hear me say a lot that an admin is an admin and a CRM is a CRM. As long as you're a good admin, you can translate all of this across business sectors. So now let's break down how all of this translates into an educational institution. So the first thing I mentioned was the sales AI in terms of generating emails. So this is something, for instance, the nonprofit arm, so a development office of a university can utilize to send out donor emails or donor check-in emails, update emails. You can prompt it to build different types of emails that may be more favorable towards that particular person, or just have them change it up because you're hitting a wall and can't really create drafts yourself. So you have it draft up different types of check-ins, event emails, etc., etc. Then I mentioned customer service AI. So these are going to be, from what I mentioned earlier, your AI bots that can help assist with low-level cases that are created. So think of this kind of like, and this is how expansive your Salesforce instance can become, right? And we'll talk about this later on because we're just focusing on AI aspects of the platform today. But this could be used for things like IT help desks at schools for both admin and for students as well, because you can set up these AI bots to help people with things like simple things like, what is the Wi-Fi password? How do I reset a password on something? etc., etc. So kind of like these low-level cases, because if you're an IT team at a school, whether you're K through 12 or a university, you know that hundreds of tickets are coming in. And even with the best systems, it's really hard to kind of navigate through all of the cases. And so the AI kind of helps to alleviate some of that by analyzing the cases that are coming in and supporting your team in closing cases that are lower level. And then if the students still can't figure it out with the AI's help, it obviously gets escalated to staff members. And now in terms of their marketing AI, I mean, it's marketed in terms of like, not to use that back to back, but it's marketed in terms of, lead scores. Remember, as I said earlier, like lead scores, how likely someone is to buy something. So how likely a deal is to be closed and stuff like that. Now, this is a tough one. So it has nothing to do with marketing, what I'm going to talk about, but one of the use cases of the AI is to analyze data and provide summaries to staff members. So when you're a school, there's a lot of information within your system. And so there's a lot of things to analyze, especially things like behaviors. When I say behaviors, I mean things like skipping class or grades that seem to be slipping, or even in terms of a development office that is charged with getting donations from donors, like what donors are likely to give again this year than other donors, like who's more likely to give or donate more to the school. So let's break that down a little bit. So like going back, I said analyzing behaviors like absences. So if you train your model correctly, you can spot patterns of chronic absenteeism before it actually becomes chronic. And you can integrate these into predictive dashboards that would provide you information such as like, this student has a 72% chance of missing, etc., based on their historical data. Or in terms of slipping grades, maybe you're a school that focuses, or a university, I know university teams focus on the mental health of their students, and there are intervention teams and social workers at larger universities. And so university may want to model their AI for certain behavioral patterns that they've established in the past. So maybe like skipping classes and grade slipping, things like that. Like, this student is more likely to probably drop out, or this student seems to be struggling and needs to be connected with someone for help or be checked up on. And then in just a general sense of analyzing data in terms of like a staff admin side of things, you can use the AI to like summarize case notes. You can use it to summarize student data. You can use it to summarize meeting notes. Like, let's say you missed a meeting with faculty or meeting with a parent, meeting with a student, and you are the lead of the department, but you needed to be clued in on what was said, what happened, the spark notes of it. You can ask the internal AI to summarize the meeting notes and provide you a summary. Now, with all that being said, I do have to provide some like reality checks and also ethical considerations in terms of using AI within a school or university use case. All schools have to submit to data privacy laws, which are FERPA here in the US, or any local equivalents. And some schools, FERPA also encompasses HIPAA, but at the same time, based off my experience, schools may be keeping their student medical data in a completely different platform that is fully HIPAA compliant, but FERPA does encompass some HIPAA rules. And now, as I said, Salesforce's AI is internal only, but it's always great to ask how things are being set up within your org before enabling anything within it. And next we have bias and equity. So AI always learns from existing data, which could also include historical bias, such as disciplinary patterns at schools. So even though you have an AI running and suggesting solutions for you as school administration and as a Salesforce admin, you should always be monitoring who gets flagged in the system and how interventions are set up. So I'm talking about in cases like I mentioned before, in terms of analyzing student data to see things like who's more likely to drop out, who needs help, who needs to be reached out to, things like that. Then also on the same note, you should also have, staff should be really transparent in terms with students, other staff members, that you are working with AI generated content and that a lot of their data will be analyzed by an AI. And piggybacking off of what I last said from bias and equity, don't let the AI make the final decisions for you. You are the human. The AI is a robot. It's a script. So don't let it make the final decisions in terms of what you're going to do. It should just be informing you of better decisions you can take. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you should be the one making decisions within your institution, your organization. And finally, you don't want to automate things. I think the special thing about AI and why I personally love AI so much in terms of where I am in my career and the automation that I've done with it is that AI allows you to automate the menial things like, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, like email write-ups, responses, analyzing data, because instead of sitting around and spending all this time at a desk, it gives you the actual time to connect with people. Connect with people in your office, connect with students. AI should be helping to alleviate some of that time that was taken away from you because of all the tasks you have, so that you can connect with your coworkers, with your students, not just automate just to automate. Now, you shouldn't listen to this and be like, well, now we've got to set up AI in our organization. I would say get all of your organizational data set, because before you start messing around with AI, you really want to dig deep and think about, are all of the other softwares you wanted to connect into Salesforce integrated? Are you tracking all the data that you wanted to track? Are those correct metrics set up? Yada, yada, yada. But if you really enjoyed this and you wanted to explore more in terms of utilizing AI within Salesforce, I have a couple of practical steps for you to take. So first off, you want to check on licensing. So all of Salesforce's AI tools require you to either have a certain edition or pay for the licensing to use it. And if you're going to go and do that, remember to start small and train your model properly. How do you do that? You work on building prompts. You work on prompting the AI to look over simple things like student cases, and provide possible next steps based on past resolutions, and even provide adjustments for those next steps in order to train it further. If you want to learn fully about Salesforce's AI, you can go to their Trailheads. Trailheads, for those that don't know, Trailhead is Salesforce's official self-learning training platform. So you go in there and you can earn badges, and not certifications because you have to pay for the certifications, but you can earn badges and super badges badges, which is like an extra accreditation from Salesforce. And each badge is based off of different modules of learning within Salesforce. And now they have a whole set of modules based on their internal AI for you to learn more about it and learn how to use it properly. And now lastly, before I wrap up, if you're ever going to do anything, always remember to be testing in your Salesforce sandbox. Never fully roll out features of any kind, not just AI, of any kind into your production org because things can go disastrously wrong. You always want to be doing things in your sandbox because if you mess it up, you can always refresh and start over. It's much, much harder if you have someone, if you're an institution, you have an admin who is just producing things inside of production, something messes up and now you you have to do a lot of backtracking, or even in the sense of the AI model, it's harder to untrain than train. So you really want to do all of that stuff inside of Sandbox. And if you achieve an outcome that you enjoy, then you push it into production. And now in terms of Sandbox, it's also common practice to train staff in Sandbox. However, when you're working with a large number of staff, it becomes even harder to get everyone to sign into Sandbox. Sandbox is confusing because you have to remember that you have two different types of logins. You have your salesforce.com login, and then you have your really long one that's like salesforce.com/or.sandbox.whatever. And in my experience, a lot of people have become confused between the production org and the Sandbox org and never remember how to log into each one. So when testing in your Sandbox, if you want other people to learn as well, you're going to want your key influencers who are like department heads, managerial staff, etc., etc. Now, just to wrap this whole thing up, remember AI is not magic. It's not a magical tool, and it's not a magical solution for you. But when it's used right, it could really change the game for many organizations in terms of analyzing data, performing outreach, or even helping students. Always focus on enhancing your day-to-day, not replacing. Now, if you've got any AI ideas for your school, like use cases that you want to use AI for, things that I did not mention in this episode, why don't you continue this conversation outside the podcast? Shoot me an email, put a comment on my Substack. Again, don't forget to follow my Substack because that's where my main podcast is hosted. That way you can get email messages on content releases. But if you have AI ideas, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to feature anyone's story here on the podcast of how you're innovating in your school. And don't forget to tune in for next week's episode, which is going to be about the best subject in the world, which is leads, or as I like to call them, potential students. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait for the next episode.